Hello friends of the interwebs, welcome back to the second channel. The main channel is for cat videos. This channel is for everything else. And tonight I'd like to look at some economic numbers the last 12 months here under Biden and compare that to the last 12 months under Trump right before the pandemic. Now we don't blame Trump for the pandemic. There's some debate about whether he did a good job handling the pandemic, but the majority of all the economic chaos that happened during the pandemic, we don't blame Trump for that. So it's not really fair to compare Trump's last 12 months in office to these last 12 months here under Biden. We're going to look at the 12 months just before the pandemic. Okay, here we go. Starting off with, I've got a window open here with a bunch of different tabs, and this has all sorts of different economic information. And then I also have a spreadsheet here where I've filled out some of the relevant numbers. Okay, starting off with, this is the big one. This is inflation. This is the horrible inflation that we've all been suffering under all these last number of years since the pandemic. Looking at the chart here, this is the last data that we've got. Here's the huge inflation that happened after the pandemic. And this is when the pandemic happened right here. This is early 2020. Here's 2019, here's 2020, and this is the huge dive that inflation took down. And we don't give Trump credit for the inflation going down, and we also don't blame Biden for the inflation going up here. Okay, so this is the dive, and this is the bounce. So what do we got? Well, the most recent information shows September 2024, that's just last month, we were at 2.4% inflation. Now that is the 12-month percentage change. So when we're looking at this number, this says that the average cost of goods and services now is about 2.4% higher than it was this time last year. And let's see what the number was just before the pandemic. Oh, snap! Well, okay, it was 2.3%. It was starting to fall a little bit, but the highest number for Trump right before the pandemic was 2.5. So, go to our spreadsheet here, and I've got Biden at 2.4. I've got Trump at 2.5. So, here's the next one. Here is the 12-month percent change. This is for employment, all employees, thousands. Any one particular point on this chart is looking at the employment for that particular time compared to 12 months prior. Starting off 2014 and over here, this is where the pandemic hits and the employment just plummets. Tons of layoffs, and then there's a bounce back up again. So we don't blame Trump. We're going to be fair. We don't blame Trump for this huge crash. And we don't give Biden credit for this huge bounce. This is just the natural progression of the pandemic. All right, so here's the tabulated data starting off here 2014. That's back in the Obama era. And you've got a high of 2, 2.1, 2.2. So this is pretty good. This is decent job growth here, 12 month. And then when Trump comes along, it's a little bit lower, but it's still respectable. It's dropping a little bit down to 1.3, 1.3. It comes up a little bit to 1.5, and then it just plummets. This is the pandemic right here. This is the horrible pandemic, and then this is when it starts to jump up again. This is the bounce. We don't blame Trump for this crash, and we don't give Biden credit for this huge bounce. Anyway, the last good number for Trump is 1.5% annual growth. And it looks like here the last numbers for Biden, well, this is P for preliminary, but it looks like we're pretty steady 1.6. So Biden is just barely beating Trump in the employment growth. So here's Biden at 1.6. Here's Trump at 1.5. Okay, now here's unemployment rate. And here we see that this is the crash of 2008 under Bush. Okay, tons of layoffs, a lot of people looking for jobs. Then Obama comes in, and it's going down, going down, going down. It continues down on the same trend with Trump, And then the pandemic hits, and boom, it spikes up to here. That's the economic crash, and then here's the bounce back where it comes back again. So we're trying to be fair to Trump. We're going to look at the last good data before the pandemic, 3.5, and Biden got down to that same area as well, 3.5, 3.4, but today it's at 4.1. So we've got 4.1 for Biden, 3.5 for Trump. National debt. Here's the next tab. Here we have from, looks like 2015, sometime in that era, 2016. So here's when Trump is coming in. And this is continuing into Biden here. So if you go through these different amounts, you're looking at 1 month to the next on the first of the month, or the second of the month, or the third. So if the first of the month or second of the month is Saturday or Sunday, then you're looking at the third. Or if the first of the month happens to fall on a Monday, then you're looking at the first. Anyway, it's the beginning of the month from one point in time to the next. So here's, well, that's 10/24. That's the most recent from just a couple days ago. But to be fair and consistent, we're going to look at October 1st, 2024, and it's at 35.67 trillion. So here's 35.67. And then we're going to go back to a year prior. So here's the beginning of October 2023, and we're at 33.44. So that's that number right there. And then for Trump, we're going to come back to the pandemic. So here's the big bump right during the pandemic. Economic output was down. Tax revenue was down. We sent out a bunch of stimulus, which was the right thing to do, but still, we're trying to be fair. The last good number we have for Trump before we got this spike here from the pandemic is 23.7. So here's 23.7, and then we're going to go back 1 year prior. So we're going to go to beginning of April 2019. So here we go. So we've got 22.03 trillion. And that's that number there. So now what I've done here is I've done a calculation. What is the percent increase in the national debt over the start to the end of these different 12-month periods? Okay, so how do we get this number here? Well, I've got my little handy dandy calculator pulled up here, and we're going to type in 35.67, divide that by 33.44 equals minus 1 equals times 100 for 100%, and we get 6.66866. And if I expand this little box here, you'll see that that's exactly the same number. So that's how I'm doing that calculation. It's the one number divided by the other number minus 1. And of course, in this case here with the spreadsheet, you just click on that little percentage sign. And I'm going to back that back down. So anyway, doing these calculations for both Biden and Trump, it looks like the national debt went up a little bit more for Trump than it did for Biden. All right. So next one, S&P 500. So here is the 1 year range for the S&P 500, and this would be a similar calculation. Here I've got 5823, and this is going back 12 months. I would go back to 4166. So here is the 5823, here is the 4166. And what do we get? Well, the S&P 500 has gained 39.8, which you see that's what that number is right here, 39.8. That's the 12-month gain for the S&P 500 stock market index. And now we want to look at the last 12 months right before the pandemic under Trump. So here I'm going to click on You have to go to max to get this, okay? So there's a pretty good dip here under Biden, but it's doing real well recently. And here's the huge crash from the pandemic. Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to get some good resolution on this, so you just have to get the best numbers that you can get here. So it looks like 3327 is the best number we're going to get here. And that's the beginning of February 2020. Here's 3327, right? Okay, and then the next number we're going to look at, I'm going to go back 1 year prior. So the beginning of February 2019, I already went past. This is really hard to navigate this. Okay, that looks like that's as good as we're going to get. February 1, 2019. Now we could go up here to February 22, but actually this number is going to be a little bit more fair to Trump. It's going to be a little bit more favorable because it's the difference between the higher number and the lower number. The further those two numbers are apart, the better that shows the growth. So 2706. That's that number right there. So what do we got? Under Biden, 39.8%, and under Trump, we've got 23%. That's the stock market per the S&P 500. Here's the same thing for the Dow Jones. Here's the 42387, 42387, and here is the 32928. Here's the 32928, and then under Trump, we're going to go to max, and again, it's kind of a pain in the butt to deal with, but here's the crash from the pandemic, and the highest number we can find there looks like 29,348. So that's that number right there, 29,348, and then we're going to go back to middle of January from 2019. Looks like 23,995. So there's 23,995. And again, Biden's stock market is doing considerably better than Trump. And finally, last category we're going to look at is gross domestic product. This is all the goods and services that are produced by year for the entire country. And now this is the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, also known as FRED. The source of the data is the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. You can find this information on that website, but this little slider here allows you to change the range of what you're looking at. So this goes all the way back to the 1950s, and we were producing $346 billion way back in the day. And then through the 70s and 80s, it's climbing. This is the crash of 2008. This is the housing crisis. And then we recovered under Obama, continued under Trump, doing pretty well. Here's the pandemic crash. And then it's really just skyrocketing. The gross domestic product is doing really well under Biden here. Now we're not blaming Trump for the crash, and we're not giving Biden credit for this bounce, but this last little bit here, yeah, that's Biden's economy. And just to make this easier to look at, I'm going to click on this 10-year range. So we can look at the latest data we have from 2023. This is the total gross domestic goods and services. We've got 27,720. So that's this number here. And then the year prior to that, we've got 26,006. There's that number. And then over here under Trump, we've got 21,539. There's your 21,539. And then the number prior to that is 2656. So that's this number here, 2656. Now, why am I doing these like percent change calculations? because that's a little bit more fair. If you look back at the total range here, you see, for example, that gross domestic output, it's just continuously climbing. And, we look at this number here, 27,720 under Biden. Well, yeah, it just looks a lot better than the last good number under Trump, which was 21,539. So that's where I'm doing a percent growth over just a 12-month period. Same thing here. Like, Trump looks like he's just doing so much better than Obama and George W. Bush, but there's just a natural curve here that the whole country is increasing its productivity over time. So again, this is where you just look at these two numbers here from one period to a 12-month prior, and then same thing here. Anyway, let's look at what we got. So what I'm going to do, these are the numbers that I put in here, and that's the calculation that comes out. I'm going to hide these just so we can see what's going on a little bit more easily. Cells are still there. We just got them hidden out of the way so we can see things a little bit better. Okay. So here we've got our final summary. What are we looking at? Well, inflation. Lower number is better. So we're going to give Biden the win on that. Job growth. The higher number is better. Again, Biden is just slightly better, but we're going to give him the win on that. Unemployment, lower number is better. So this is Trump. Trump actually did have slightly better unemployment. Now, the way you want to think about this, okay, imagine there's 100 people looking for a job, and 3 people or 4 people can't find a job. Everybody else got a job, but 3 or 4 people didn't get a job. They're still looking, so that's what that number means there. So next we have the national debt percent change, and we see that the lower number is better. So again, we're going to give Biden the win here. S&P 500 percent growth, percent change. The bigger number is better. So this is where the Biden economy is really doing fantastic. It's almost double what the best 12 months were under Trump right before the pandemic. This is really a pretty amazing spread here. Same thing with the Dow Jones. It's not quite 2-to-1 like the S&P 500, but Biden clearly gets the win on that. GDP, gross domestic product, considerably higher growth under Biden than under the best 12 months for Trump. Okay, just when I was getting done editing this thing, I remembered there was one more metric I wanted to look at. Average hourly earnings. This is another Fred chart, and so for Biden here, the latest data shows 35.36. So here's the 35.36, $35.36 per hour, average hourly wage. And so that's September 2024 coming back to September 2023, 34.01. There's your 34.01. Now here under Trump during the pandemic. Now what the heck's going on here? We've got a spike, and then we have a drop. That's sort of backwards from what we expect to see. Well, the only way I can explain this is you think about who got laid off during the pandemic. Well, the restaurants were closing, right? So the waitress and the cook and, the bars closed, so the bouncers got laid off. The people that were low-wage earners, those are the ones who got laid off. And meanwhile, we're keeping the doctors around, the doctors, the lawyers, the CEOs. So that means that the average goes up. Now when you start bringing back the waitress and the cook and the bouncer, and those are essential people. We learned during the pandemic that these are very, very important people. Everybody has a critical job to make the world go around. I always thank everybody who's doing the thankless kind of work. But anyway, once we started bringing those people back, then the wages came back down to a more normal level. So initially, this looks backwards, but it makes sense when you think about who got laid off, and then those people came back again. So we're not going to give Trump credit for this little spike, but we're also not going to blame him when the numbers come back down to normal again. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit on this. What number should we use for Trump here? This is the last good number before the pandemic. We don't know if this is actually the effect of the pandemic or if this is just another natural, this is just a natural up and down. So anyway, I'm going to use this higher number. I'm going to be as generous as I can to Trump and use this higher number, 28.77. This is probably the better number to use, but just to be generous to Trump, I'm going to use 28.77. So there's your 28.77 there. And so this is March of 2020. Come back to March of 2019. That's 27.8. And that's this number here. So again, hiding these two cells, these two rows here so we can see what's going on. What do we got here? Wage growth. Percent change, this is a 12-month percent change under Biden is 4%. Under Trump, being as generous as we can, is 3.5%. So again, Biden gets the win here. Now, it must be said, the president does not control any of these numbers. The president can propose legislation to encourage growth for the economy. The president can project optimism and confidence, stability, right? Not having an unhinged, unstable lunatic in the White House. That helps to project a sense of calm, and that can help economic growth. And it's not all sunshine and happiness. Lots of people still having a hard time. Prices go up quickly, they come down slowly. We've got some improvement in wages, but we need a lot more of that to make up the gap. But when you hear somebody talking about how we had the best economy ever right before the pandemic, well, it's just not true. In 7 out of 8 of these economic indicators, the Biden economy is doing just as well, if not considerably better, than the Trump economy. And that's being as fair as we possibly can to Donald Trump, looking at the economy right before the pandemic hit, when he claims we had the best economy ever. It's just not true. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. If you want to make a little donation for more content, links are in the comments. We'll see you next time.